Me a favor, join me in welcoming Jack Waters. Jack, come on up.
Thanks. I got a mic right here. Good morning. Geez, what do you think the over-under is on how many cups of coffee Steve had? I mean, just kidding. I just met Steve. He probably doesn't like me anymore. So I'm Jack Waters. I'm the CTO and president of the fiber business for Zayo. That was the silence. I just enjoyed my second anniversary at Zayo. So I've been there for 2 years. It's kind of hard to believe. Prior to that, I spent 19 years at a little place. It was actually a really small place when I joined, about 8 people. I left when there were 14,000. That was level 3 communications. So I spent a lot of time. I'm not a wireless guy. I feel very intimidated by being in a wireless, you guys, it's usually I know a little bit about the topic, but you guys know so much more than me. But I'm going to talk about something I do know about, and that is fiber networks and kind of the intersection of fiber and, as you all know, 5G and wireless networks. And it seems like a pretty obvious thing today. It wasn't so obvious 10 years ago as to where the intersection of wireline and wireless would be. I feel compelled, though, to always start with, did I advance? A little history. Hard to talk about evolution without a little history, and a little history around infrastructure. You gotta love open spaces. So 20 years ago, everybody remember this time? 1998, the bubble was blowing up. Everybody was going to get rich. We had the likes of AOL and Yahoo and Google. It's kind of funny. I look at that, and how many people had an AOL account? Be honest. Najim, I know you did. Yeah, I mean, kind of crazy, right? Today, both Yahoo and AOL are part of Verizon, which seems like unthinkable if you think just 20 years back. And at that time, the fiber network build was in full swing. And we were probably, at the time, myself and a few others, were the leaders of the band. We, at that time, raised, when we had 8 people, we had $3 billion in cash and marketable equities. We raised $14.5 billion in I think 18 months. And at that time, we thought no one else will raise any money. That we would close the door behind us and no one else would raise any money. Well, we got that wrong in a big, big way. It turns out there were a bunch of builds in the United States at that time. The level 3 build was obviously one. 360 Networks, remember those guys? Leadcore? Construction company in Canada, started a build in the U.S. and Canada. You had the Williams guys who were building on the gas pipeline as part of Williams Energy. And then you had Broadwing who were building, along the railroads and state roads. And then you had the Quest. The Quest, I mean, honestly, the Quest folks probably deserve the credit for blazing the trail. They started before anybody else had. Phil Anschutz and team had kind of parlayed their interest in railroads and turned it into the builds. But these builds were a little different, and ones that almost don't intersect at all with the wireless infrastructure. These were long-haul builds. And when we built Metro Network, and I'll give you the proportion, the level 3 build at the time, 16,700 miles being built long-haul, only, I think, 3,500 miles being built in metros. And you think about that, that's almost exactly opposite of what's happening today. The build-outs today are so substantially more in metro networks than they are in long-haul networks. And probably that might change a little bit in the future, but I think that ratio is probably more long-lasting. And then the bubble burst, and well, that kind of sucked. It burst in probably, I don't think in besides one other time, business has changed as quickly as it changed at that time. Cisco lost 87% of its market cap. Amazon, who clearly it's worked out okay, $107 to $7 a share at that time. Pets.com went bankrupt. I mean, hard to believe, I know, but Pets.com did. When I went to work at Level 3, I actually went to work for Peter Kiewit's Sons, which was a construction company. And the construction company was going to be the original investor. And so I call my mom up, and I say, Mom, I'm leaving my job at MCI, my forever job at MCI, or so I thought. I'm going to leave my job at MCI, and I'm going to go work for a construction company. But then the construction company is going to turn into a telecom company, and it's going to be great. So my mom would run around and tell her friends, yeah, he's going to work for a construction company, but it's going to be a telecom company, and everything's going to be great. Then the bubble burst, and she just ran around and told everybody to work for a construction company. So, hey, engineer, that's as good as the jokes get, all right? This is kind of, I'm not sure, I read this quote, and I'm not sure how much I believe even today it's exactly correct. Quote saying, today researchers estimate that about 85% of the fiber lines, clearly a reporter in the know of our industry, the fiber lines in the ground in the US still are dark or inactive. Even the fiber that is being used isn't close to having its full capacity exploited. Like I said, I don't know if I believe that entirely, but I think the undeniable truth is that it was ahead of its time. We were absolutely ahead of our time. Timing's everything in business. That didn't work out for many, many companies because of that timing. But this was generally true at the time. Anybody believe that today? Anybody believe we have a fiber glut today? It's only 13 years ago. Pretty amazing. And trust me, every one of you would have probably said that back then. And then if things weren't going bad enough, and the funny thing is, I lived my life, many of you lived your professional lives through this time. The bubble bursting and the recession were only 6 years apart. It felt so much longer when that had happened, but it really wasn't that long. And the thing that's kind of crazy is if you decided, man, I'm getting out of tech and I'm going to invest in something super secure like real estate, probably not working out. So Zayo was born in 2007. I was not there. Zayo, turns out that's the Nick and Willie's Pizza that on Pearl Street in Boulder, and turns out that when Dan started Zayo, he had sold a company called ICG Communications back to Level 3, and as part of it, Level 3 was still paying the rent in that building, and he started Zayo in that building. So I don't think he ever paid Zayo back, or Level 3 back for paying his rent for the first year. But Zayo was born. Why? Well, the original thesis was, we had made it through the bubble bursting. A lot of small fiber providers existed in the US, and they were good businesses. They had actually come through bankruptcy. A lot of them were mom and pop, family-owned businesses. They had nice property. They had a good revenue stream, but they weren't going to flourish as a small company, and that there was an opportunity to create a platform and consolidate. And there was a little bit of a theory of the case that, hey, we can probably buy them on the cheap before anybody notices. If you remember, the recession only lasted about 2 years. And so the buying on the cheap part didn't quite work out, but it it worked out in general. And then, right around that same time, consolidation began, and it really, if you think about the number of companies that started consolidating fiber networks, it took off in 2006, 2007. Level 3 clearly was one. Zayo, this is a picture of Zayo's networks that we bought in the last 11 years, and you can get a feel for the amount of infrastructure we've been able to piece together over time. It's a substantial footprint today, and if you looked in on, I'll show a market here in a little bit, if you looked in on any one market that we operate, it's a very, very deep, dense fiber footprint in market. Along the way, it almost seems crazy that somebody went out and raised $300 million and built a network from Chicago to New York in the mountains of western Pennsylvania, digging through the rock and crazy stuff. That was Dan Spivey and James Barksdale, and they built this network. They made all their money back on their original 9 customers and went on to operate spread networks, which was to support the high-frequency trading between the exchanges. I wouldn't, my guess is, if you ask them, wouldn't have been a complete home run. Microwave technology, if you folks figured out quickly that latency, the thing we learned back in physics, if you remember that, the light goes faster in air than in glass. That turned out to be the case, but this property turned out to be a pretty nice property. We actually purchased this earlier this year for a little bit of money. Oops. Infrastructure. So same time, 2000. Who would have predicted in 2005 that data centers would be what data centers are today? I wouldn't have. There's no way. I thought the Equinixes and the DuPonts and DRTs were dead. And this is just, in case you're wondering, that is Equinix's stock performance over the last 10 years or 11 years. It's up 8-fold in those 10 years. Pretty impressive when you think about the impact. Now, question for the audience. If you were starting your own company today, would you build your own data center? Who would? You don't count. The Facebook guy, I would. Yeah, okay, well, yeah. You guys produce more cash flow than. But if you were starting an enterprise today, I really don't think that anybody would build their own data center. That's a crazy change in our industry in just 10 years. And one that I believe is very long lasting, that this is not something that's going to swing back the other way. I think it has so much momentum now that it almost is critical that momentum continues. And around the same time, this is kind of where the point of this meeting is, the mobile carriers started to realize, hey, this T1 to the tower thing doesn't work real well, and this multi-T1 to the tower thing doesn't work real well, and man, we need the fiber providers to start to build out to the macro towers. And as I mentioned, you take a look at kind of the result of that, and this is a picture of our Dallas network 10 years ago compared to today. So that's a network, I don't even know which company we bought in 2008, but the network today is about 3 times the mileage of the network just 10 years ago, all in support of fiber to the tower for a few carriers. So that densification really started in earnest about 10 years ago. So the demand drivers, demand's always a funny thing. I've drawn so many demand curves that were wrong, I've stopped drawing them. But a few things are pretty cool, and if you think about what drove demand 10 years and what's driving demand today, a lot of them are the same things. And the first is around, obviously the iPhone changed everything. The iPhone pushed the carriers to build out more and more fiber to towers just because of the data demand. Turns out, anybody want to guess how many iPhones have been sold in the last 10 years? 1.2 billion. How many people have an iPhone? How many people have an Android device? All right, you guys are not a representative sample of market share for some reason. It turns out Android devices have 80% market share today. So we all, I would have raised my hand on the iPhone side too. We all are not representative, but if you get out of the US probably and you look a little bit further in the industry, and that was only 11 years ago. The first Android phone, how many people had an Android dream? Yeah, I kind of thought so. First Android phone in 2008, but today enjoys that 80% market share. So kind of interesting and something that's really driving us. Sorry, I'm one ahead. Sorry. The other demand driver that I think we take for granted a little bit is all of the over-the-top video and what's happening. So YouTube started 2005, bought by Google in 2007 for a few billion. Turned out that was a pretty awesome bet at the time. Hulu started in 2007, funded by NBC and a few others. And Netflix didn't start in 2007, but what happened in 2007 for Netflix? They started distributing online movies. Remember, Netflix used to be I got something, was it FedEx or UPS? I don't even know. In mail, U.S. mail. Mailed to my home, and I got a DVD, and I threw it in my DVD player. But in 2007, something fundamentally changed and changed the ability for Netflix to distribute. And that's one of those cost curves that's important to understand. It turns out that the cost to generate or to deliver a movie online, the crossover point compared to mailing it. So it costs how much to mail it? I don't know, 50 cents, $1, whatever. And the cost to distribute online, that crossover happened in 2006. And suddenly, it became a whole lot more efficient to deliver video online. And that's when Netflix flipped to delivering online. And that's never going back. As we continue to drop the cost of communication, the ability to distribute more and more things like video will become even more important. Social media, you'll hear from Najim later on, so I'll let him espouse on social media. But I find how many people had a social media account 10 years ago? How many people had a MySpace account? Oh my God, I can't believe you admitted that. But, I mean, just 10 years ago, and now it's laughable to think, we all have many, many social media, and we are not the demographic of social media. We're a generation off of the demographic of social media, frankly. And my kids don't do anything except on social media. Rarely consume anything else. And consumer trends. This is one that I think doesn't get enough play right now. The smart home and cord cutting, and if you're in your 20s, you wouldn't even think about buying cable today. You buy an internet connection, and you get all your content delivered over the top. That probably is one of those generational jumps that has to happen, but is going to happen. The other thing about the consumer trend to me, and important to pause on for a second, is number one, 20 years ago, we looked for technology trends where? At business. You look at business because business was investing in technology. and you say, what are the technology trends happening in business? Today, where do we look? The consumer. We don't even care about what business does anymore. We look at what the end consumer is buying as their end device and what they're consuming, and that is what is driving demand. And that's a pretty big change. The other change that I think, and it's one that will probably take another housing cycle or two in the US to realize, is the fact that this whole smart home thing, it's for real. If you counted the number of connected devices in your home 10 years ago, how many would you have had? Probably 1 for every person, 2 for every person. How many would you have today? 50? 100? If you build a new house, probably have 100. And that part of kind of IoT and technology, it's one that's going to happen for sure. Clearly, commerce is driving demand. We talk about Amazon. It's a great company, and people buy tons of stuff on Amazon and Facebook and everything. But the part that I think gets a little underplayed is the fact that every retailer now has an online presence themselves as well, and that is something that I don't think any of us would have seen. I think it was a big question whether that could happen or not. And if anything, the funny thing I find interesting is this whole brick and mortar to online. And now we're starting to see a little bit more of online with brick and mortar. So Amazon owning Whole Foods. And there is a need for physicality, and I think that a lot of companies will figure that out. And I did make it to slide 20 without saying big data, so I want credit for that. And look, I mean, this is, I think it's one of the most obvious trends, and I have a different take, I think, than a few on why it's such an important trend. What has happened with IoT and big data is nothing. I mean, sure, there are more complicated, sophisticated algorithms today, but what's allowed IoT and big data to happen is a drop in cost. Drop in cost in compute, drop in cost in storage, drop in cost in networking. Today, an IoT device is possible because that little chip inside that connects it to a network is super cheap. Before, you wouldn't have been able to build a device because it was too expensive. It's not that the sensor our sensors haven't gotten that much better over the last 10 years. It's the fact that the integration and network has become so affordable. And then, again, back to if you started a company, would you buy a server? You would? Yeah. Not many would. Not many would. And that is something that, is driving demand. Clearly, if you looked at our company's kind of crazy. We have 4,000 people. We do everything online. I think we probably own 200 servers, and it's for esoteric stuff. Everything else is on Google, the G Suite, Salesforce, and Workday, our whole company. And we're in an older company. Again, a big trend. So here is a demand curve, and one that, if you think about all the things I kind of walked through around that same time, this demand curve is not very complicated, clearly. But remember the quote about the fiber glut and how demand wouldn't be able to catch up? So from 2004 to 2014, it's a 43% CAGR. Most industries would kill for that kind of demand. And then, have you guys ever seen this report, the Kleiner Perkins, Mary Meeker Internet Trends report? It's awesome. It's really good. She does an awesome job every year. Highly suggest taking a look at it. But what she is pointing out in this graph is the fact that today more and more of our time is spent on devices, on our mobile device. And even though we're spending more time online, the shift in kind of traditional device to your mobile device sounds kind of obvious. The thing is, if you're in the desktop and laptop industry only, you probably don't love this chart. You're spending a whole lot more time, folks are spending a whole lot more time using their mobile devices. And if you look at your kids, for those that have kids, the graph is skewed even more by age. All right, so what's this mean for networks and the implications for us? And again, am I the only fiber guy in the room? Okay, yeah, but you work for us. Yeah, there's like 2 other in the room, so it's kind of interesting. The place I like to start is, so why are you all so excited about your industry and our industry and the convergence of the two? And the first is, if you saw the 43%, we would argue that traffic is faster growing on mobile networks today. And I kind of believe this might be a little understated. There's a bit of a supply-demand imbalance right now, and as we release more supply, it's hard to say what will happen to growth. But we're still looking at an industry that's going to grow in the 45-50% over the next forever. How many years? This is Cisco VNI. I should give them credit. I think Cisco also does a really good job in this. They've been doing it for quite a few years now, and it's I think really well done and thoughtful. This one, anybody work for Morgan Stanley in the room? All right, so I got to make this is like the craziest slide ever. It is a 30-year prediction. It's like saying in 1988 that you could, with high confidence, yeah. That's like saying in 1988 I could predict what was going to happen today. I mean, it's laughable. But putting that to the side, I do believe that autonomous vehicles and what's going to happen, this is kind of directionally correct. And pick your number, 40 terabytes per hour generated in a car. It's not hard to believe. It's not hard to believe at all. You look at the number of sensors that are just in a seat. It's kind of amazing that the amount of electronics in cars and what will be in cars in the next few decades. And the great thing for the wireless industry is some of that 40 terabytes per hour have to leave and have to go somewhere. And that's the opportunity for you all. 5G, you guys know more about 5G than me. To me, it means more traffic, more devices, less latency. It's what comes after 4G, I guess, in a lot of ways. But no, look, I'm a technology guy. I get a lot of it, but the fact is, it's the next generation. There will be others. The important thing for us, there's a few. As a fiber person, what I care about mostly is the ultra dense deployment. So we have to densify as we roll out 5G. The whole front haul, back haul, and what's happening there with more and more connectivity from front haul to some centralized location, and edge computing. And I know that folks are going to talk about that some more later on. But the fact that as we build out networks and densify networks, we have to push compute out further than where it sits today. And that's, you could talk to Najim, you could talk to Google, you could talk to Amazon, whoever. They all, I believe, the hyperscale folks believe very much that you need to continue to push some compute out. Now, don't get too excited. This is just a cartoon drawing, but I know, I don't know. I saw Zenfi was here somewhere, so I didn't see Ray yet. Ray would love to show you that slide, but it doesn't really matter the exact math. The macro math is what is kind of awesome. Today there are pick your number, 120, 140,000 macro towers in the US, roughly. Ask any of you, ask any of the big four, what does small cell densification look like in 5G? And you'll get a number returned somewhere between 5 times and 10 times what is deployed today. So no matter what, pick your number. 5 times to 10 times what we have deployed today is a significant amount of infrastructure to go build. Now some will solve it with fiber. Some will solve it with the last 300 feet being UE relay or whatever. But no matter what, the densification needs in the US and other places around the world are dramatically higher than they are today. Requires a few new techniques. I'm running out of time. A few new techniques. I'd love to tell you that construction is advancing. It's not. I mean, we've been talking about things like microtrenching for 10 years, and we still, we do that much of it. Still is a tough thing to go do. Not a lot of municipalities will let you do it. There's still difficult things. And anybody says that it's deployed in scale, don't believe it. It's just not. But we have to get better. We also have to get better at permitting and siting and the part that doesn't get a lot, we love to talk about densification in big cities, right? But for everyone to really be served, we have to start building more and more network in tier 3, 4, 5 cities around our country for sure and around the world. And that's a tough math problem. That's a tough financial math problem. Things like E-rate, which are in the US, it's a government program that allows for school districts to go apply for money. They get funding, and they fund folks like us to go build fiber networks to schools. It's a great outcome for the schools. It's a great outcome for us. We had more E-rate businesses last year than we ever have. But things like that will help us build in other markets. And the great thing, and probably the best thing, is you think about my last 30 minutes, and it's hard to believe we're kind of where we are. We had this incredible hype 20 years ago to go build. We went and built, and then about halfway through, we decided we had too much, and there was a lot of capital sucked back out for a while, and now we're back in there's not enough fiber in the ground for what we need, which is good for all of us. And with that, thank you very much.